All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Camp McDowell virtually. My name is Al. I am an instructor here. You might remember me from the turtle video last week. And today I have a bunch of snakes for you all. So this time frame that we have now, I have some snakes to show you. I have some fun facts about those snakes. I also have a list of common myths and misconceptions about snakes. There are a lot of those out there. And I would love to talk about those. I have things to talk about with all the snakes that we have. But also, I would love to take your questions. So as soon as people are getting questions in the comments, I am happy to answer those. Any questions you have about snakes, whether those are the snakes I'm holding, other snakes that you've seen in your backyard in Alabama or other places. I am not an expert by any means. I just really, really love snakes. So I am happy to answer your snake questions whenever you pop those in the comments. But first of all, if you're watching this, take a deep breath. Prepare yourself mentally to see a snake. She's huge. She's terrifying. She's got massive, gigantic fangs. I'm reaching into my pillowcase. I have to find her. Here she is. This is a baby. Let's see if she'll show off her little face. This is the first snake that I have today. She's very curious. She is a Brooks king snake. Common king snakes are a species that lives all over the eastern U.S. We have them here in Alabama. But here in Alabama, they're mostly black. They have some kind of yellow speckles and a yellow belly. She is a Brooks king snake, which just means that she's from southern Florida, and she has that nice light white kind of speckling. It is just a fancy snake people term. She is 9 months old, almost to the day. She's a little over 9 months old, so she's a baby. She's still really young. And she is actually one of my snakes. I have a couple of snakes of my own, and I am ideally training them to be ambassador animals, just like all of our snakes here at Camp McDowell. We have 4 snakes at camp, and I have 2 that I also brought with me today. So she is doing a good job of showing off for everyone. And one really cool thing about king snakes, they are well known for having these really pretty, big, shiny scales. They're super shiny and super smooth. And when people see that, especially how shiny she is, a lot of people think that snakes are slimy. And that's a question we get a lot, is like, are they slimy? Is it gross to touch them? Snakes are actually dry. She's very curious. She will climb on your camera if you're not careful. They're dry. They're really smooth. They feel almost kind of like leather, not quite as soft, but often people, when we have students here touch a snake for the first time, or even chaperones, like sometimes grandmas touch snakes for the first time, and I always think that's a really awesome moment in class. People are usually surprised that they feel so smooth and kind of weird. And different kinds of snakes have different kinds of scales. So she's got these like super smooth, shiny scales. Other snakes might have rougher scales with kind of ridges on them. I'm getting distracted because I love her so much. She's peeking. Where are you going, sweetheart? So you can see her kind of inching her body along my wrist like that. She's kind of trying to climb over me. Snakes are literally just tubes of muscle. They're super, super strong. They do have bones, though. Some people get confused and think that maybe snakes are invertebrates, maybe they don't have backbones. Snakes are all spine. They've got spines and ribs all the way down their back. If you ever look up a snake skeleton, it's really interesting and really cool to look at. So they just have enough vertebrae in their spine that they can still be really flexible and really wiggly like this.
Awesome. We have our first question. Sandra would like to know, what is the average life expectancy of a snake?
That is a great question, and that varies a lot depending on the snake. So a smaller North American snake like this, she's a king snake. That's a type of snake called a colubrid, and most of the snakes that you see in your backyard are going to be colubrids. So that's things like corn snakes, rat snakes, king snakes, water snakes, garter snakes. They live around 15 to 20 years for the most part. But we have other snakes in the world, bigger snakes like pythons and boas, that can live upwards of 40 or 50 years. So it depends. Like with a lot of animals, the bigger they are, the longer they live, generally. most things outside of like dogs, that's the case. Let's see, I have a whole list. Another thing that a lot of people think, and I'm sure some of you at home are freaking out, like, why are you holding that snake? A lot of people think that all snakes are venomous or poisonous, and that is something that we always teach people here at Camp McDowell, is the difference between venom and poison. If an animal is venomous, think like make a V with your fingers and turn it into fangs. Venom is something that has to be injected. So if a snake bit me and I got really sick from it, that would be a venomous animal. And snake venom, there are a lot of different types. Some of them target different parts of your body. And sometimes it's really, really mild and it's not worse than like a bee sting, which is also venom. Stingers are also venom. Sometimes it's really serious. But not all snakes are venomous. As a matter of fact, there are about 3,000 and change species of snakes in the world, and only around 400 of those are venomous. She is not venomous. She's also not poisonous. Most snakes are not poisonous. Something that's poisonous is something that if you eat it, touch it, you get sick. So most of our amphibians here in Alabama are a little bit poisonous. They might not be poisonous to us. I still wouldn't recommend that you go out and start eating salamanders out of your yard, and you probably don't want to anyway, because you might get sick. It's more usually an issue for our dogs that like to try and eat things. And there are actually poisonous snakes in the world, but they get their poison from eating those amphibians. They kind of repurpose it, and then whatever eats them gets sick. But that's not the same thing as being venomous. A snake can be either or a little bit of both. Generally.
Jan would like to know if they're cold to the touch.
If they're cold to the touch. So snakes are cold-blooded or ectothermic. That word ectothermic just means outside heat. So they get their heat from things outside of themselves. She is definitely getting a lot of heat from my hands right now. I've been running up and down the stairs. I'm nice and warm, and she's enjoying that. So if a snake has been hanging out somewhere warm, they might be warm to the touch. They'll cool down pretty fast, though. My other snake, who we'll see in a minute, he usually is pretty warm when I pull him out of his house, but he cools down pretty quickly. She feels kind of like a cold noodle right now because she's been in a pillowcase, just sitting around. But yeah, they don't feel warm the way that like a small mammal would or a bird.
Arthur would like to know, why do snakes stick out their tongue so much?
Why do snakes stick out their tongue so much? She is a really good model of that. She loves to stick out her tongue. So snakes have a really cool adaptation that is called a Jacobson's organ or a vomeronasal organ. The vomer is the coolest bone in your body, in case anyone was wondering. And that organ is something on the top of their mouth that is like smell and taste rolled into one, and also super, super, super strong. And a lot of other animals actually have this organ. Zebras and horses have it, cats have it, all kinds of animals. And if you've ever seen a cat make that kind of, like they smell something really strong and they make that kind of like, that kind of face, it's more extreme in big cats, like tigers do like that. Or if you've ever seen a horse or a zebra go like, they're using that same organ that snakes are using. So when they stick their tongues out, they're getting all those little scent particles from the air, all the little molecules, and they can stick them back up in that organ, and it's like smelling and tasting everything around them. And their sense of smell is super, super strong. So she can probably smell me and know like what flavor of Cheerios I had for breakfast. Not that she knows flavors of Cheerios, but I don't know what's going on in her little brain. And I'm sure y'all have noticed that snakes have forked tongues. That is a really cool adaptation that lets them actually tell which way things are. So they can take that forked tongue in, put that up in their Jacobson's organ, and if there's more of a smell on the right side, say, then they know that whatever that thing is over there. And if you watch, let's see if we can get up close. If I put my finger near her, sometimes she will wiggle her tongue toward my finger. I can do it sideways. Yeah, good girl. She's more occupied with wanting to climb on the phone. If I let her get too close to my face, she'll climb on my head. She's very, very curious. So a lot of people are kind of freaked out by the forked tongues, or like, why is it sticking its tongue out of me? Why is it licking me? That's so rude. And they're just curious. They're just sniffing. They have really, really good sense of smell. And they don't have very good eyesight, and they actually don't have ears at all. That's one of the ways that you can tell the difference between a snake and a legless lizard, is that legless lizards have ear holes and snakes do not. And a lot of people think that snakes are deaf and can't hear at all, but they actually can feel vibrations through their jawbones, especially lower frequency, like lower sounds. So like if I put her, let's see if she'll let me put her down on the table. She wants to cuddle with my nice warm hands. If I put her down on the table and I like tap over here, she can feel that vibration in her jawbone, and it's like hearing it. She also just doesn't like being exposed, so she's trying to find somewhere to hide. Slither over to the camera. Oh, good slithering. It's kind of hard for her to find something to grab onto on this smooth table, but she's making it work. Where are you going?
Don would like to know if all snakes lay eggs.
That is a really good question. So I don't have a snake, unfortunately. I don't have a snake that I can pull out and talk about egg laying, because all of the snakes that we have with us today do lay eggs. But I think around 30% of snakes are live-bearing or ovoviviparous, which is a really big fancy word, but if we break it down, ovo means egg, viv means live, and parous means birth. So that means they have eggs in their tummies, and then those egg shells dissolve and they give live birth. It's really complicated. And I've heard different things about whether they're ovoviviparous or truly viviparous. So if any real snake experts are watching and want to correct me on which one it is, please tell me, because I'm still confused. But long story short, there are a lot of snakes that we have around this area. If you've ever seen a water snake or a garter snake, or maybe you have a friend who's really, really lucky and has a boa constrictor, those are all snakes that give live birth. And it's pretty much just like a bunch of tiny noodles just kind of exploding out of them. But most snakes do lay eggs. They have kind of more of a softer shell than chicken eggs, and they're a little more oblong, sort of. Right. I think our next guest might want to participate.
All right.
So I might put... Oh, I was going to point out one more thing about her. So I mentioned she is a king snake. And the reason that I got her out first, other than to start with the tiny baby one and then move up in size, is that king snakes are called king snakes. You might have heard of king snakes or king cobras. A lot of the time when I say I have a king snake, people are like, you have what? They think I'm talking about a king cobra. And I'm like, no. I do not have a snake that could kill me. Those are both named that because they eat other snakes. So if I handled another snake and then I picked her up and I had that smell in my hands, king snakes really, really, really love food. Her favorite thing in the universe is food. And so if I smelled like another snake, she might try to nibble on my fingers a bit. But usually she's very, very friendly, as you can see by her crawling all over me. So that's part of why I handled her first. That's also something really cool about them. A lot of times people I hear a lot of students saying like, oh, I saw a snake eating another snake in my yard. It's probably a king snake. And they actually are immune to the venom of viper species. So they can eat cottonmouths, copperheads, rattlesnakes even, because they're immune to that venom. And those snakes, I learned this yesterday when I was researching for this live stream, those snakes have some really cool defense mechanisms to try and not be eaten by king snakes. They'll like body slam them out of the way because those venomous snakes are really big and thick. But king snakes don't really care. They will do pretty much anything for food. All right, I'm going to put her back in her little pillowcase. Pillowcases are a common way that reptile people transport reptiles because, like I said, they're super strong, they're super wiggly, they're escape artists. And so a pillowcase that's tied up at the top is one of the best ways to keep them from going on little adventures that we don't want them going on.
Mm-hmm. While you're doing that,
Another question.
Karen would like to know if you have a favorite Alabama snake.
Do I have a favorite Alabama snake? Well, I have a picture of one of my favorite species. I have a lot of favorite Alabama snakes. Around here, I get really excited when I see water snakes because they just have really goofy little faces and I think they're the cutest. I have a picture of another one of my favorites. I also get really excited about all our venomous snakes because I think they're super cool. But This picture right here is an eastern hognose snake. They're called that because they've got kind of a curved little nose scale. They use that for burrowing and for digging in the dirt. They eat mostly toads. And this snake, this picture, that snake is showing some really cool defense mechanisms that that species has. They will basically pretend to be cobras and flare out their neck like that. They also play dead. So if you see a snake that is like flopped over on its back, lolling its tongue out everywhere, really dramatic, that might be a hognose snake that is playing dead and wants you to leave it alone. It's pretty cute. Very dramatic. All right, I tied these pillowcases really tight, so we might be here for a minute. I'm also gonna use some hand sanitizer between snakes, make sure I'm not spreading too many germs. So this next snake is not a species that is native to Alabama, but I brought him because I wanted to talk about a couple really cool adaptations that he has. He is a ball python, and that is the most commonly kept snake in captivity in the world. Used to be corn snakes, and then ball pythons took over from them because they're really, really cute. Here he is, the handsome boy. He is not a normal color of a ball python in the wild. He is called a banana, which is a type of albino. They're not usually yellow. This would not blend in very well in the rainforest. But he is... Ball pythons are from West Africa. They're native to Nigeria. I think most ball pythons in captivity came from Ghana originally. So he likes a much more tropical temperature than we have, even here in Alabama. I have to keep him warmer than I have to with the other snake, per se. Hi, honey. You're a little nervous. And they're called ball pythons. He's probably not going to show us this because he wants to explore. But when they're nervous, instead of biting or hissing or flaring up, they just kind of curl up in a ball and put their head in the middle so nothing can get to it. And because of that, because they're so gentle and so docile and not really aggressive toward humans or defensive toward humans at all, they're actually considered sacred in a lot of cultures in West Africa where they're from. If people find a dead one, they'll build a little tiny coffin and hold a snake funeral for it because they're so gentle, and also because they eat rats, and animals that eat the animals that will eat our food are generally pretty good for us.
That leads in really well to Caitlin's question. Okay, what do snakes eat in the wild and in captivity?
Snakes eat in the wild? So in the wild, he would probably eat mostly rats and mice, some kind of rodents. Ball pythons tend to be a little picky. Daisy, my other snake, the king snake, she would eat literally anything she could get her little mouth on. So frogs, toads, lizards, fish, mice, rats, other snakes, birds, eggs, pretty much anything. Most people in captivity feed their snakes rats and mice because those are easiest to access. Usually you get them frozen and then you thaw them because feeding live animals to another live animal is... Oh my gosh. He did this last night in my bed.
Move the table.
Get back out here. He loves crevices. So, anyway, I was saying, feeding live animals to other live animals is pretty dangerous for the animal that's being fed. He was exclusively fed live before I got him, and I don't think he has any really visible scars because he's small enough that he wasn't getting like adult rats, but it could have been. A lot of snakes from rescue situations will have scars from rats or mice that fought back, basically. He's a good boy, though. He doesn't go in the crevice. He's coming for you, Josh. Handsome boy. Yeah, so snakes, there are some snakes, like the hognose snakes I was mentioning, they specialize in eating toads. They almost exclusively eat toads. And we used to think that they were using their rear fangs that they have to pop those toads when they puff up as a defense mechanism. But those fangs aren't really big enough. They actually have like a really, really mild venom that's, for most people, is not a worry if they bite you. It's not really going to hurt you. But it's enough to deal with a toad. So, and there are other snakes, like water snakes eat a lot of fish, which makes them kind of stinky. Where are you going? He just really wants to explore today. He was making a ruckus in his box, in his little pillowcase. Oh, so the thing I wanted to show you guys about ball pythons. Pythons, I don't think we have any python species in the United States, unless I'm forgetting. We do have some boas in the United States, which are often confused. We don't have any native pythons. Ball pythons are from West Africa. There are a lot of species in Australia. Lots and lots of really cool ones, like carpet pythons and scrub pythons. And I wish I could have a scrub python, but they get like 20 feet long, so that's not going to happen. They have a really cool adaptation for eating. They have the same forked tongue and a good sense of smell, but they also have heat pits on the side of their face. And if you look closely, he's got all these holes on his face. It looks kind of funky if you're not used to it, because he's got 2 nostrils and then just all these holes. Those holes are able to sense heat. They're like an extra infrared sight that he has. And so when I feed him, I have to make sure that his food is nice and warm so that he knows that it is food. He thinks it's alive. He's a really good eater, though. He will eat pretty much anything that moves. And I actually have some pictures of vipers that we have in Alabama. This is an eastern diamondback rattlesnake. You might have those if you live further south in the state or like in Florida. This is a baby cottonmouth. They have heat pits as well. So they've got a nostril somewhere in here, and then they've got this big pit. It's a different kind than the ones that the pythons have. They've just got one big pit, but they use that just like pythons do. They'll like lay in wait and ambush, and then when they sense something warm, like a mouse coming by, they'll strike at it and grab it. So it is a really interesting adaptation that these different animals that are not that closely related, pythons I think are considered kind of like basal snakes in the snake family tree. They're pretty basic snake design, versus snakes that have venom and rattles and big chunky heads are pretty fancy snakes. Those are snakes with all the bells and whistles. You want some coffee? Okay. Go over here. He also has an 8 on his back. I just like his 8. He has a favorite number. That's my mom's favorite number, actually, if she's watching this. We like to talk about his.
Amanda would like to know, should she get a ball python?
Is this Amanda my roommate? Okay, regardless. Whichever Amanda this is. I personally have mixed opinions on what kind of people should get what kind of snakes, or snakes in general. Snakes they take up more space than you would think. They have a lot of specialized needs. They need heating. Some species, they generally don't need lighting, but personally I put lighting on my king snake's enclosure because she's a diurnal species. There's a lot of discourse in the snake keeping communities. They need food that a lot of people are not super comfortable keeping frozen rats and mice in their freezer. And they can be really expensive. Whether that's just getting the snake itself, he was pretty pricey because he's so pretty, or whether that is feeding them, taking care of their needs, that kind of thing. A lot of times I have students who come and are like, I want to get a snake right now. And I'm like, that snake, especially a ball python, could live for 40 years. Are you prepared to take care of this animal for 40 years and clean its stinky poop and feed it a frozen rat every week? Though ball pythons eat a little less than every week. Anyway, I love snakes. I think they're amazing animals, and I think that, especially for kids, having a snake or having any kind of pet teaches you a lot of good life skills, a lot of responsibility, and a lot of compassion for other animals. But you have to be prepared to care for it. And if you're the parent of someone who wants a snake, you also have to be prepared to care for it, because kids can't do everything. Ball pythons are really popular pets. They are kind of like really popular dog breeds. The more of an animal you have, the more likely there are to be people out there who are not doing a great job of caring for their snakes. Usually not on purpose. Usually they just are kind of confused because there's a lot of conflicting information out there. And so finding a healthy one can be a bit of a challenge. And they also have a habit of being picky eaters. And when snakes are picky eaters, that's not just like, oh, I don't want to eat my Brussels sprouts today. That is, I will not eat for 6 months. And I will scare you very badly because I won't eat for 6 months. Thankfully, he is a wonderful eater. I got really, really lucky with him. After he eats, every Sunday night, he will sit for about 3 hours and just watch me. Just sit in his cage, all coiled up, ready to strike, watching me because he's so hungry and he wants to eat all the time. ball pythons pretty much either won't eat or you have to watch their weight because they want to eat all the time. So they're not necessarily the easiest snake. Females can get 5 feet and 2,000 grams, which is about twice his size. And you need a lot of space for a snake that big. So personally, I think they're wonderful snakes. They've got really sweet personalities. If you want a snake and are prepared for the commitment and the effort of keeping a snake, do your research. Personally, I am a little bit more of a colubrid person, like I was saying before with the king snakes and corn snakes and stuff. I find them a little more fun to hang out with than pythons. Because pythons, some people call them pet rocks, but I always say I wouldn't have to rescue a pet rock from falling off a table every 30 seconds. He's quite active. What are you doing?
Sandra would like to know, where are the heart and lungs and what's the internal organ situation?
Really good question. I should have printed out a picture of this, but snakes, a lot of people think they're just kind of all tail. His tail is only like this much of him, this little end bit. So some snakes, I probably wouldn't be able to see on him because he's so big, but sometimes, especially with albino snakes, with light-colored snakes, when they're itty-bitty babies, you can actually see their heartbeat. But their organs are just kind of all throughout their body. So this is probably mostly digestive tract down here. Heart's somewhere in this area, I would guess. And their lungs, they're not side by side like ours are. They're like one at a time through their body because they have to make room for all that stuff. So they've got all the same kind of organs as us. There are probably some differences. I am not an expert on internal snake anatomy. They just have to spread out those lungs, those organs in a different manner than us. And actually, I just remembered something else really cool I want to talk about, if he'll let me. We'll see. Pythons, like I said, they're kind of like the basic model snake, the original snake. And they, because of that, they are really similar to lizards. Lizards and snakes are kind of the same lineage. And they actually have like the very basic remnants of hips. When snakes decided not to have legs, some of them decided to keep their hips. And they actually have these little like claws. These little pelvic spurs is what they're called. They're like vestigial little claws that used to be legs. His are huge. They're usually not that big. I don't know what he's doing with all that down there. But that is something really cool that you see in pythons that you don't see in most types of snake. Just wants to go off the table. You wanted to come out and now you want to go back, huh?
Jeremy would like to know, why does the snake have black eyes?
Why does the snake have black eyes? So snakes have all different kinds of colored eyes. Like I said, he is a type of albino, and I'm not going to get too much into like molecular biology, but he's a type of albino that still has some dark pigment. He's not completely albino. So he's got, if you get a good lighting on it, his eyes are kind of olive green, sort of. They're really, really pretty. You probably won't be able to see in this light, especially because he's nervous about the camera. Hi, honey. I know. Would you like to show Josh your pretty little face? He's like, I don't want to. I want to go home. One of my friends likes to say that he kind of looks like a Funko Pop from a distance. He totally does. Just a little smiley face and 2 giant black eyes. So, different kinds of snakes have different colored eyes, but he is a funky, tyrosinase positive albino if you really want to go home and do your research and get fancy with it. Hi, honey. What are you doing? Yeah. Are you going to climb on my face? You're so sweet. I'm going to put him back because he's being a sassafras, as usual. Part of the reason I got a ball python is because they have such a reputation for being such nice snakes, and compared to my king snake, which have a reputation for being sassy, he's the sassy one.
While you're putting him away, Annie would like to know, how well can snakes see?
How well can snakes see? That is something I was bringing that up earlier when I talked about the heat pits and the Jacobson's organ. They have all these adaptations to find their prey with the heat and the smell because they don't see very well. And especially, there's a myth that I came across a couple times. I had never heard this, but I saw it a couple times online, that snakes go blind in the summer. And that is not actually true. They have the ability to shed their skin, which is something really, really cool they do. We shed our skin too. We are always kind of shedding skin cells. But instead of doing it in tiny pieces like us, they shed it all in one go. And when they get ready to do that, they go what's called into blue. They turn kind of grayish. Their eyes get like totally cloudy and blue. And they can't see during that period of time. They have a really hard time seeing. But even in general, they don't see very well. So now that these guys are back in their box, okay, you don't need to be trying to come out of their box because they're naughty. I have 2 of Camp McDowell's educational snakes here. And these snakes are seasoned animal ambassadors, unlike mine. They're very experienced, they're very sweet. So I'm excited to show them to you guys. This first snake, if you have ever seen a copperhead, copperheads are pretty freaky. A lot of people think they are. I think they're really pretty. But they have that kind of brown and orange coloration. They're really bold, they're really bright. A lot of people will see this kind of snake that I'm about to bring out and think they're a copperhead and freak out and kill them because they're in their yard. This kind of snake is a really sweet and helpful snake. They have wonderful personalities, they're very friendly, and they eat a ton of mice. They like to hang out in cornfields and silos, in barns, and eat all of the things that would eat grain. So sometimes they're called the farmer's friend. They're very helpful. That's something to think about if you have snakes living in your yard. Do you want to have mice living in your house? Because if you have a snake nearby, you probably have less mice in your house. That's not to say to release snakes free in your house or anything. I wouldn't recommend that.
That kind of touches on a question that Pam asked, and she'd just like to know a little bit more about how you could identify a dangerous snake, or if you get bit by a snake and you don't see it anymore, how worried should you be, and what would you do in that situation?
So that is a great question, and there's a lot I can talk about here. This is a corn snake, first of all. Corn snakes look kind of like copperheads. They've got that same color. But instead of having the... Copperheads have kind of a Hershey's Kiss pattern on the side, versus corn snakes look like they've got a bunch of little horse saddles all down their back. But a big difference that you might notice, let me pull out my venomous snake pictures again. What you doing, sweetheart? Here we go. These venomous snakes, our copperhead and our rattlesnake, have big kind of chunky triangular heads, which compared to his little narrow head, those look pretty different. They also have really big fat bodies versus colubrids, this kind of non-venomous snake. He is very active today. They have more kind of skinny, slender bodies that are sort of all one width for the most part. I'm going to put him around my neck and see if he chills out. What you doing, honey? But that's not true of all venomous snakes. I have another example here. You don't have to worry about these if you live around Camp McDowell or, say, in Lake Birmingham. But farther south, we have something called a coral snake. That's this top snake. Those are a different kind of venomous snake called an elapid. That's the family that includes coral snakes, it includes cobras. There's lots of other pretty funky venomous snakes. They're very venomous, but they're also really shy, and they have rear fangs, kind of like the hognose snake we were talking about. And so they have to work pretty hard to actually bite you. But if they do bite you, it's a big deal. And they look a lot like milk snakes. I don't remember if that's a milk snake or a scarlet king snake, but they're very similar. You might have heard a rhyme, red on yellow, you're a dead fellow, red on black, you're okay, Jack. That's definitely true in Alabama. That is not true for most of the world, because there are a lot of different kinds of coral snakes and a lot of different kinds of milk snakes and other snakes, and they all have different kind of patterning. But the reason that this snake looks so much like this snake is something called Bayesian mimicry, and that is when a harmless animal imitates a harmful animal to try and get predators to leave it alone, basically. And we see that a lot with snakes, where one snake, it's actually really interesting because milk snakes up north, where there aren't coral snakes, they look almost like corn snakes. They're just kind of brown and white patched. But the closer you get to coral snake territory, the more they resemble this kind of red and white banding. It's really, really cool to look at like the gradient of what color they are. He's coming to see you. He's a big boy. and I'll do this and put snakes around my neck, especially if they're getting a little too exploratory, and students will get really concerned. They are not going to choke me. I'm a lot stronger than a snake this size, so I'm not really worried about that. And he also doesn't think I'm food. Hi, what you doing? Put the coral snake away. So, I was saying the ways to tell the difference between a venomous snake and a non-venomous snake. If they have a big triangular head, you might be concerned. But I have another picture here. I'll put this next to my copperhead if I find it. Oh, what did I do with it? Cottonmouth, not copperhead. People get these species mixed up a lot. This is a cottonmouth. This is one of the more dangerous snakes we have in this region. They have a very, very bad reputation, which they don't necessarily deserve. I can talk about that in a minute once I wrangle this little man. Where are you going? Anyway, our participants are not behaving today. This over here is a northern water snake. And they have that same kind of body shape as a corn snake with that kind of long oval head, but they can flatten their heads out to look more triangular. And that is one way that they try and get people to back off. So if you see a snake and you don't know what it is, just give it its space. Even if you're pretty sure it's a cool snake that you want to pick up and not a snake that'll bite you, unless you're 100% positive, give it its space. And even then, it's generally best to just let snakes do their own snake thing. Hold on, I've got to wrangle this little man real quick. He's all tied up in this chair. Hey, dude. Ooh, someone's jumpy today. Where are you going? Like I said, snakes are escape artists, very exploratory animals. And they can wiggle through pretty much anything. They're not quite like a mouse or a rat where they just have to like get through a shape as big as their head, especially snakes like pythons that have really big fat bodies, but they can get through a lot of small spaces. Come on, bud. This is going to be the really fun part of the video, huh? I'm just watching the snake misbehave. Oof. Come here. Alright, I fetched him. So if you get bit by a snake and you don't know what it is, if it hurts really, really bad, it's probably venomous. If it looks like you have giant fang marks, it's probably venomous. It's probably a good idea to just go to the doctor just in case. But even venomous snakes can do something called dry biting, which means that they don't actually inject any venom, because venom is a really expensive resource. It takes a lot of energy to make, and it's really important for them to catch their food to have that venom. So they really don't want to bite you, and they really don't want to use their venom on you. Different snakes have different rates of dry biting. There are some species where like 80% of bites are dry, and some species where 5% are dry, and most of the time they're injecting venom. Cottonmouths are actually one of the species that dry bite pretty frequently. Despite their reputation, deaths from cottonmouth bites are not super common because in the US, generally we are able to take care of venomous snake bites, even if it's from a more dangerous species. We have the anti-venom, we can get people to the hospital, and they'll be safe. What you should not do if you are bit by a snake is try to suck out the venom. That is just going to get venom in your mouth, if anything, and it's not going to do anything good for you. You want to keep it below your heart, make sure you're staying calm, not getting blood flow to it. But if you're giving snakes their space, you're pretty much never going to have to worry about that. The vast majority of snake bites, especially in the American South, are on the hand of males aged 18 to 25, usually white males, I believe, and there's usually alcohol involved. So, if we can extrapolate from that, if you find yourself saying, hold my beer, I'm going to go pick up that snake, think about your life choices for a minute. For the most part, generally we're not going to have to worry about being bitten by snakes in our day-to-day lives. There are definitely really freak accidents where snakes will go out of the way to hurt people if there's something wrong with the snake usually. But most of the time, they really don't want anything to do with us, and they're pretty nervous about us. There's actually a really cool study that was done, I think in a couple decades ago. This is my favorite scientific paper in the whole world. Y'all should look this up if you're into scientific papers. It was a study where some herpetologists, which is reptile and amphibian scientists, they put like a rubber boot and a rubber glove on a stick, and they just pestered cottonmouths to see what it would take to get them to bite. And they found that when they just poked a cottonmouth, none of them bit. When they stepped on a cottonmouth with a rubber boot, 1 or 2 of them bit out of like 80 snakes. And when they picked them up, about half of them bit. So it takes a lot to piss off a snake that much. You have to really be trying to bother them. And a lot of people have this thought in their heads that snakes will like come after them and chase them. What's really happening, there's not very much room in this little head for a brain. They're not particularly smart. And if they're nervous, if you're scaring them, they are going to try to escape as fast as they can. And if they seem to be chasing you, you're probably blocking their best exit. Some snakes have bigger attitudes than others. The water snakes I was talking about have a reputation for having a bit of a bigger attitude. But most of the venomous snakes we have around here, the big fat copperheads and cottonmouths, are just kind of lazy sausages that just sort of want to lay there.
Jan would like to know, if you do get bit and you go to the hospital, do you need to know what kind of snake it was?
It really helps. Obviously, most of us are not snake identification experts. Even when I first got here, I couldn't really tell the difference between a copperhead and a cottonmouth, though I can talk about that real quick. Cottonmouths are always going to have this kind of black mask, this dark stripe across their eye, and they don't necessarily have the same like defined Hershey's Kiss pattern. And they also, as they grow up, they get darker. They can be like jet black when they're grown-ups. So that's just in case you want to go out and identify some snakes. So it really helps to know, but we also have kind of general anti-venom in the United States for all of the snakes that we have issues with, because most of them are vipers, and their venom tends to be pretty similar. So even then, most of that venom isn't going to kill you. We don't really have any snakes in the United States that are like super, super life-threatening. We don't have like, why are you so jumpy? Someone is very wiggly today. I think he ate like 3 days ago, so he's probably like, I have so much energy, oh my gosh, I gotta run everywhere. Most of our snakes are not necessarily going to kill you, but they have like copperheads, not super venomous, but that venom is necrotic, and that means flesh falling off and other bad things. So you want to get to a doctor quickly. And if you know what kind of snake it is, that's really helpful. Or even if you can just say, it was brown, it was fat, it was like, it had a black mask, it had a, red eyes and a purple tongue, and then the doctors will be like, okay, all right.
Jeremy would like to know if you can identify snakes by their patterns.
By their patterns. So, like I was saying, he's got kind of saddle patterns. The next snake that I'm going to show you also has that sort of saddle pattern on his back. He's not a corn snake, though. He's another similar type of snake. And here in the US, snakes will generally have a sort of pattern that fits with what genus or what kind of group of snake they are. So this guy has the saddles. That is common in rat snakes. Corn snakes are actually a type of rat snake. And they have, actually, before I'll put him away, I'll show you guys his belly. Rat snakes will have this kind of like dark on top, light on bottom belly. If y'all have ever, watched Shark Week or something, you might have learned that a lot of fish have that kind of pattern too. And that is so that they blend in from multiple angles. From above, if he's hanging out on the forest floor, you see him in the leaf litter, he's blended in really well. From below, if you're looking it up at him, and you see the sky, and then you see this black and white speckled thing that's wiggling everywhere, he blends in pretty well to the sky, especially if you are, an animal that's eating him. For us, we might be like, that's not blue, that looks like a snake, but other animals can't necessarily tell the difference. So there are a lot of snakes that we can tell by pattern. There are definitely some that look really, really similar, and you have to do things like counting scale rows and DNA tests, and herpetology is fun. He's back in his pillowcase. So for the most part, pattern and color will be enough to tell them apart. But we have a lot of snakes here in Alabama, and a lot of species of snakes. And I certainly don't. I'm from Chicago. We have like 4 or 5 kinds of snakes there. Probably more than that. I've done more snake stuff down here than I have there. Anyway, here in Alabama, we've got a lot of snakes. It can be challenging to tell them all apart. But with time and practice and a good field guide, you can learn all your snakes. So I'm going to, I can't say any one last time. I've got one more snake to bring out, and this one he is kind of a fan favorite here at Camp McDowell. He's a big boy. He is so sweet and so friendly, and he actually, with his enormous size, there's something really cool to talk about with that. Snakes, and a lot of reptiles in general, will keep growing throughout their lives, and they don't necessarily, that's not like they're growing the same rate as they did when they were babies, but they still grow a little bit. And so this guy is really old and really big. He's like thicker around than my fingers can cover. He's all curled up in a ball. This is our gray rat snake. Some people call him chicken snake, so if you've heard that name, it's the same thing. And gray rat snakes are really good climbers. They're closely related to corn snakes, so you can see that same kind of saddle pattern on his back. But they more specialize in hanging out in trees. They will go up in trees and eat like fledglings and eggs and stuff. But of course they also like to drink. Eat rats and mice. That's generally what most snakes will eat most of the time. He's got a really cool black tongue too. He's just chilling. Are you pretending to be a ball python? He's showing us what a ball python does. So this snake is actually with us here at Camp McDowell because his tail was run over by a car, and thankfully he survived that. But a lot of people will not really care if they see snakes on the road and don't care if they run them over with their cars. And snakes are really important to our ecosystems. They eat a lot of animals like mice and rats that will just totally explode and take over if they are not kept in check by a predator animal. They're also prey for a lot of larger animals like birds, eagles, hawks, things like that are really cool. So they are a really cool critter to have around and to take care of in the wild. They also, the thing about snakes, we learned a little bit about turtles last week, but snakes do not have a shell. Turtles have shells. Alligators and crocodiles have, their whole thing where they're alligators and crocodiles and they're 10 feet long and they'll kill you. Lizards are really fast. They've got those legs and they can kind of skitter away. Snakes don't really have much going for them in terms of defense mechanisms. So part of the reason that people are so scared of snakes is that they have to try really hard to not get eaten. And they've got a lot of really cool mechanisms. For some snakes, that is biting or even just pretending to bite. My king snake will do that sometimes. If I startle her, she'll just kind of smack me with her face. Like, look, I'm biting you. I'm biting you. I'm biting you. She's not biting me. But that is only one of many defense mechanisms. Usually biting is kind of a last resort with a lot of snakes. Some of them will rattle their tails, and our snakes are not going to show us that because they're so chill and friendly. But if you see a snake in the wild, and it's kind of wiggling its tail, and you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't look like a rattlesnake. Other snakes, like black racers, like rat snakes, will do that where they wiggle their tail against the leaves really fast, so it kind of sounds like a rattlesnake. Maybe it's enough to trick someone. That's a really common defense mechanism. And some snakes even do that when they get really excited. Just when they're like eating, they'll just wiggle their tails really fast. And then, like I said, there are snakes like hognose snakes that will play dead. They'll just kind of flop over and look really dramatic and loll their tongues out everywhere. Some will hood up, so they'll pretend to be cobras. They can literally flatten their ribs and like stretch out their neck. And they also have something, and this is a reason to not pick up snakes in the wild, is that they produce musk, which is just a really stinky fluid. Sometimes it's mixed with poop, sometimes it's on its own, and they can pretty much spray it everywhere if they're really nervous. Usually in captivity, snakes know that we're not going to eat them, and they're chill, and they won't do that. But if you pick up a snake in the wild and suddenly you're like, ooh, it smells really bad, it probably must all over you. And that smell will stay with you. It can be really strong, especially like garter snakes and water snakes that eat a lot of fish. It's nasty. I would not want to get musked by a water snake. I have been musked by garter snakes. I've done a little bit of snake research in the past, and I think the first time I did snake stuff, someone handed off a fox snake to me before I knew what I was signing myself up for, and I was just like, oh yeah, musk on me, I don't care. And then 30 seconds later I was like, oh no, I've made a mistake. That kind of thing. It can be very stinky. So they'll try pretty much anything to not get eaten. And honestly, they're just kind of legless noodles. So I don't blame them for doing whatever's in their power to not get eaten by things.
Katie would like to ask our last question for this live stream, and is if I see a snake in my yard, should I keep it as a pet? What should I do with that?
That's a great question. Like we said with turtles, if you find an animal in your yard, that's not going to make a good pet. That animal is part of the wild, part of the ecosystem, and if you take it and keep it in your house, it's effectively, don't go in the crevice, it's basically dead to that community, to that population. And so, especially like a full-sized adult animal, that is a breeding adult that population is losing. And that's really important for wild populations to have those animals. If you find an animal in the wild, even if you want to pick it up and take a picture, which generally I would only recommend if you really know what you're doing and you know that you're not going to hurt that animal or be hurt by that animal, put it back where you found it. If you are interested in getting a snake, you can handle the... He wants my coffee. He wants the coffee. Honey, you're not going to do that. Snakes like to get into nonsense. If you're interested in getting a snake, instead of taking one out of your yard, I would recommend going to a reptile expo. They're even here in Alabama. I went to like 3 of them last season and just stood around looking at all the pretty snakes. They're a fun experience. There are reptile stores too, though you kind of have to do your research and be careful because some of them are a lot sketchier than others, frankly. I wouldn't necessarily recommend going to like your local Petco or PetSmart because those animals are... You like with most animals, you kind of want to know where you're getting an animal from, and it's a little harder to know the source from like a bigger pet store. That's not necessarily to say that those are bad animals by any means, but in my case, I've chosen to go for like snake breeders where I know the source of that animal. And generally, I would just recommend going to reptile expos and reptile shows because they're a fun time, and you can see some really cool things there. And sometimes it's like, why does anyone own that animal? But yeah, if you find a snake in your yard, you should be glad that you have someone out there eating your mice and your rats. And if it's a really tiny snake, like a earth snake or green snake, we have a lot of green snakes here at camp, they might be eating a lot of bugs, and you probably don't want that. Something to hang around eating bugs. If you have any more questions and you pop them in the comments, Josh and I will both be on and off answering questions, and I would be happy to ramble more about snakes. Thank you all for your patience with me rambling about snakes. Get very excited. And our Camp McDowell noodles are feeling extra bleached. I'm trying to remember if there's... Oh, there was one more thing I wanted to talk about with him. This is our one snake that I brought today that has keeled scales. That means he has a ridge in the middle of his scales. And he's a little rougher than the other snakes because of that. So there are a lot of different theories about why snakes might have keeled scales. It's some really cool reading to do if you're curious. Some snakes will actually use those keels to kind of rub their scales against each other and make like a hissing sound that's really loud, like egg-eating snakes do that. I've never seen him. I don't think he does anything like that, but it's a really cool, different kind of adaptation. And because so many people are scared of snakes or don't like snakes, there aren't that many people out there researching them, and there's so much that we don't know. So if you're really curious about snakes, it is never a bad time to go out and learn more and try to help us learn more about them because the world needs to know more about them because they're the best.